Daf Tesvav Amud Beis, 5 lines from the top, Amalei Rav Nachman. To recap where we're holding in the sugya, we learned in the Mishnah that Rav Chanina Sakana Kahanim said that Mimem Shel Kahanim Nimnom Lisref Es HaBasar Shenitma V'Vlada Tuma Im HaBasar Shenitma B'Ava Tuma Afal Pi Shemeisifin Tumal Tumasa. So he's made that they burnt together the Maser, the meat of the kachim, even though one was Talmei through an Avatum and one through a Vlad, they burned them together. The Mishnah continued and said that Rameir says, we can learn out from their words that you can burn on Erev Pesach Truma Tahira with a Tmeya, that you can burn it together. We had two different approaches about what Mitivreihem means. From whose words are we learning it out from? So one approach was that we were learning out from Rabbi Chanina Sakana Kahanim, that the case was that the Basar of Kachim, that part of the Basar, some Basar was Nitma with an Avatum. So therefore it's Talmei D'Oraisa. It was Nitma with a Vlad HaTuma, D'Rabbanan. So therefore, on a derisidic level, you have meat kachim, which is tomei, with kachim, which are tohar, and nevertheless, they burned it together. They were able to burn it together because since in any event it has to be destroyed, since in any event that midrabanan the basar is tomei, so they burned it together. Similarly, we can learn out over here, you can burn the chometz, which is tomei, which is chometz, which is tor. Now, even this is tomei and tor. But we learn out from Chanina Sakana Kahanim that on the derisidic level, the kachim was tomei and tor. But since there was a tuma d'Rabbanan, you can burn it together. Over here, since they're talking about the 6th hour, which it's also midrabanan, it's also midrabanan, it must be burned. Therefore, since in any event it has to be burnt, and there's an isser d'Rabbanan and isser hano, you can burn it together. So as Taisa explains, we're equating the tuma d'Rabbanan with a isser d'Rabbanan. So therefore, you can learn out from Chanina Sakana Kahanim. Reish Lakish said, no, that's not the pshat. It's limiting the Mishnah, that the case of Rav Chanina Sakana Kahanim, that it's nitma with a vlada tuma d'Rabbanan. And therefore, Reish Lakish said, no, that's not the case. Really, I'll tell you, Reish Lakish says, the Rav Chanina Sakana Kahanim is talking about that it's basar v'nitma ba'avatuma, it's an avatuma d'oraisa. And it was nitma b'vlada tuma. It was nitma with a vlada tuma. It's also d'oraisa, and therefore you can't really learn it out from Chanina Sakana Kahanim, because in the case of Chanina Sakana Kahanim, the tuma was on they were both tomei d'oraisa, and here we're talking about burning the chometz of the truma, which is tohar with a tomei. So we're not learning it out from Chanina Sakana Kahanim. He said, therefore, we're learning it out from the Rav Yeshua, the machlokes of Rav Eliezer and Rav Yeshua, where Rav Yeshua said that if you have the truma tahira on the upper level of the wine press, and it will flow down to the lower level and mix with chulin, which are tomei, and therefore it will become tomei and will become aser, and it will ruin the chulin on the bottom. Because the chulin prior to the truma falling in is mutter. It's chulin, which is tomei, which is mutter. But when the truma falls into it and now it becomes tomei, it'll have to be burnt. Rav Yeshua permitted, so long as you can't save a revius b'tahara, he permitted being metamed b'yadayim, with your hands actively being metamed to collect it in a kli, which is tomei, to prevent it from falling down into the bottom and being metamed the truma on the bottom. He allowed you to do that, and even though you're going to be metamed, because since it's going to be destroyed anyway, there's no chiyuv of shimur anymore, and therefore he allowed you to do it. So that's the way Reish Lakish learned. And on that, Rav Yossi argued, and he says, "Ein min amida." Now, according to the first Mahalach, Rav Yossi argued and says you can't learn out from Rav Chanina Kana Kahana because we don't equate the Tumah D'Rabbanan to the Hofstedter, the Isra No D'Rabbanan. We don't equate the two, as Taisus explains. Now, according to this pshat over here, we're learning it out from Rav Yeshua. We don't know yet why Rav Yossi argues. The Gemara will discuss that shortly. But prior to that, the Gemara asked, how can you say that he learns out from Rav Yeshua? We see the Baraisa that says that Rav Yossi says, how can you learn out from Rav Chanina Kana Kahana? So how can Reish Lakish say that Rav Meir says we're learning it out from Rav Yeshua? It says clearly in the Baraisa that Rav Yossi argues, it says, how can you learn it out from Rav Chanina Kana Kahana? So now see the Gemara. The Gemara says, Omerle Rav Nachman, Rav Yossi Lavadaita. Rav Yossi didn't realize where Rav Meir was learning it from. He assumed that he was learning it out from Rav Chanina Kana Kahana. That's where he learned it. And therefore he said, and Rav Yossi said, how can you compare it? How can you learn it out from there? But Rav Meir said, no, I'm learning it out from Rav Yeshua, not from Rav Chanina Kana Kahana. And on that, Rav Yossi responds and he says, he says, you can't learn out. Even from Rav Yeshua, you can't learn out. The Hamoid Rav Elazar, Rav Yeshua, because they would both agree that in Chometz and Erev Pesach, you have to burn them separately. You can't burn them together. So the question is why? Well, we see that Rav Yeshua says by the case of the Gas HaElyon, you can be matamed biyadayim, because once it's going to be ruined, there's no mitzvah, there's no chiv of shemira. So why can't you learn out from there to Chometz Erev Pesach? So v'mai einayin mina mida mido midai. It's a good analogy. Mora says no, shiny hasam, because that's different. They can have said chulin. Over there, perhaps I'll tell you the way the Pnei Yeshua explains. Perhaps I will tell you that even though under the Reisidiga level, yes, it's true that once it's going to be destroyed, you have no mitzvah of shimur, of protecting the truma from becoming tomei. But perhaps I'll tell you, but nevertheless, there's an Isser D'Rabbanan. How does Rav Yeshua allow you to collect the truma that's in the Gas HaElyon, the wine in a kli which is tomei, you're being metamed b'yadayim? Over there, there's no Isser D'Rabbanan because of the hefsed, because of the hefsed of the chulin. Otherwise, it's going to fall down and it's going to be ruined. But how would that permit you over here, where there's no hefsed of the chulin, how would that allow you to burn the two together, to be matamed, even though midaraisa there's no isser because it's going to be destroyed anyway, but midarabanan it should be also. He says, why isn't there a loss in the case of the Mishnah? In the case of burning an Erev Pesach, if you have to burn it separately, then you have to make two fires. You have to collect wood separately. So you're going to have to spend more money and burning extra wood for that. Saba, an elderly man, said, no, that is, you can't ask a kasha from that, because even though they were mekel, and even though Rav Yeshua says that we don't impose an Isser D'Rabbanan by a hefsed, but that's only a hefsed meruba. So that's when you have the case of the yain and the Gas HaElyon. If it flows down to the bottom, then it will ruin the chulin. It'll be a substantial loss. Over there, they relaxed the Yisur D'Rabbanan, but over here, it's only a certain amount of firewood. It's a minimal loss. Over there, they did not relax the Yisur D'Rabbanan. So therefore, that's why Rav Yossi says that you cannot bring an analogy to and learn out from Rav Yeshua to the case of Chometz. Now, the Gemara is going to introduce, going back to the first approach, mahalach that based on the first approach that Rav Meir says medivreim. When he says medivreim, we're talking about not Rav Yeshua. It's medivreim Rav Chanina Skana Kahanim that we're learning out this din for Erev Pesach. Amar Rav Asi Amar Rav Yochanan machlekes b'sheish. He says this machlekes between Rav Meir and Rav Yosi is only on the burning of the 6th hour. There can we burn the truma tahara with the tameya? That's what they argue. Aval b'sheva in the 7th hour, where there's an isur deraisa, when it's also min ha'toira b'hana divra kol sarfim. Everyone agreed that you could burn it together. Once there's an isur deraisa of hana, then they would agree that you can burn together. Meaning, according to this approach, that even Rav Yosi agrees that you can compare something which is also min ha'toira to something which is tomei. The only machlekes, they only discussed it before they argued on the case on the 6th hour where the Isser D'Rabbanan was Isser Hana D'Rabbanan. Over there, they argue, can you compare it to the case of Tuma, but not in the case of a Deraisa. Omar le Rabbi Zerah Ravasi Neima Kasar Yechanan Masnisin Bava Tuma Deraisa Vlada Tuma D'Rabbanan Umay Medivrei Medivrei Chanin Skana Kahanim. Let us say, therefore, that Rav Yochanan says, or Rav Meir says, we can learn out Medivreim. He means Rav Chanina Skana Kahanim. And the case in the Mishnah, the case of Rav Chanina Skana Kahanim is where they burnt together. The Basar Kachim was Nitma Bit Avatuma Deraisa together with that which was Nitma Bavlada Tuma Derabona. So on a Deraisa level, they're Tomei and Tor. And therefore, we can bring the analogy to the case of Chometz on Erev Pesach with Truma Tameya and Truma Tahira. And therefore, he says, therefore, the question in hand is, can you compare the Isser D'Rabbanan on the 6th hour, where it's also D'Rabbanan, and can you compare the case of the Tuma D'Rabbanan? Meaning that Rav Yochanan says is machlekes b'sheish is only in the 6th hour. But prior to the 6th hour, where there's no Isser, even Isser D'Rabbanan, there's no Isser at all, Bahana, then you can't burn it. Now, therefore, if Rav Yochanan was learning from Rav Yeshua, then it would be even prior to the 6th hour, Rav Meir says you can burn it. Because the point of Rav Yeshua is that since it's going to be ruined anyway, it's going to be destroyed anyway, there's no more mitzvah shimur. So if that's the case, you would say even prior to the 6th hour, there's no mitzvah shimur, and you can burn it together. Since it's being burnt, then there's no mitzvah shimur. That's if you would learn from Yeshua. But from the fact that Rav Yochanan says, no, the machlek is in the 6th hour, which we're understanding to mean the 6th hour and not prior to the 6th hour, that means is that the issue is, no, it's not like Rav Yeshua that says since it's going to be destroyed, there's no mitzvah shimur. There is a mitzvah shimur. But if there's an Isser D'Rabbanan, Rav Meir says there's no Isser of shimur, you can burn it. That's only in the 6th hour. And Rav Yosi says, no, in the 6th hour, it's on the Rabbanan. You can't compare that to an Isser to a case where it's already Tomei. You want to say it's Tomei and Tor and compare it to a case where it's Tomei Deraisa, Tomei D'Rabbanan. You can't, even though there's an Isser D'Rabbanan on it. But in the 7th hour, where there's an Isser Deraisa Vana, there you could compare the two. There it is an analogy. And that's how we agreed to that. So Amar lay in, he said, yeah, this is where Rav Yochanan learns it out. He learns it out from Chanina Sagana Kahanim. Itmar nami am Rav Yochanan masnisim bava tumah deraisa v'lada tumah derabona. O mai medivrei Rav Chanina Sagana Kahanim. Haflekes b'sheish, aval b'sheva divra kol asarfim. But in 7th hour, divra kol asarfim. Lema Messiah le. Let's bring a raya from the brisa that we learned earlier. Hapigol v'anoiser v'tameh. It's pigol, Moser Kachim, that was pigol, or noiser, that was Tomei, Beis Shammai Amrim, Ein Nisrafin Ka'achas. Beis Shammai says they cannot all be burnt together. But Beis Hillel Amrim Nisrafin Ka'achas. But Beis Hillel says they can be burnt together. Now, we're saying over here, L'chayr, the Rai is that Rav Yosi, would seem to be that Rav Yosi is learning from Beis Hillel, that they say that the noiser, the pigol, and the tomei can all be burnt together. Why can they all be burnt together? because they are all also midaraisa. They all have an isser midaraisa. So that would imply that the reason they can be burnt together is that they're all also minatayr. But if it wouldn't be for the fact that they're also minatayr, you cannot burn it together. But therefore, where something is also minatayr, therefore chometz on the 7th hour, where even the truma tahira is also midaraisa, similarly you can burn it together. So Yomi Masechet, let's bring a raya that the Rav Yossi argues is in the 6th hour. But if it will be in the 7th hour, where they all have an Isser Deraisa, where the Chometz, even the Torah, is also Minat Torah, then you could burn it together, because it would seem to be that the Beis Hillel, the Ryan that Rav Yossi is bringing from Beis Hillel, is that once something is Aser, they're all Aser, and then they can be burned together. And even though the Tommy is Tommy Minat Torah, and the other ones, the pigel and the nicer are not, but they're all also minatayr, they can be burned together. Similarly, chometz in the 7th hour. The Gemara says, no, it's not a raya. Shiny halsam dis lutum midarabanan. No, that's different, because even the pigel and the nicer, aside from the iser deraisa, but there's also a tuma derabanan. The rabban were guys are tuma on all of these things. It's not a pigel and nicer metamas yadayim. They're metamas yadayim, as we learned earlier, that the Rabban guys are tumah on them to ensure that the Kahanim were careful and not bring something that they pigel or nicer, because they would become Tomei. Therefore, they imposed this Tumah Rabbanan. So maybe I'll tell you that the reason they can burn together is not simply because they're all awesome in the Torah. Maybe that wouldn't be enough to say that you can burn it together. The reason you can is because they're also all tomei, albeit midarabanan, but they also have a tumah. If something is completely tohar, maybe even if it's also minatayra, maybe you cannot be metamet. So maybe therefore chometz, even on the 7th hour, if it's truma tahira with truma tameya, maybe you cannot burn it together, because you're making a tomei, something which is tohar, you're making a tomei. So it's no raya. Yomi Masechet, let's bring a raya from the following. Palashiv's bread that became moldy, and it's now not fit for human consumption, but a dog would eat it. It is metama to Masechet, it's still considered a oichel insofar as to Masechet, and it's metama with the size of a beya. Oichlim are makabel to Masechet, have to Masechet. Foods, things which are non-foods, are not. Kalim are makabel tuma, oichlim makabel tuma, raw materials are not makabel tuma. If the bread was edible to begin with, it's makabel tuma. Now, even though it's no longer edible, but since a dog would eat it, it still retains that degree of susceptibility to tuma, it's still makabel tuma. But if it's bread, it's not edible, and a person would eat it, a caliph would, but it's therefore we say it's metam to Masechet, but on the surface in matmeya bePesach. If it's truma, it can be burned together with tmeya and Pesach. We say if it's nifseles, that for machal adam, nifsel machal adam, it's not fit for human consumption. Therefore, a person is not going to eat it. It can be burned with the truma tmeya on Pesach. Now, this must be going according to Rav Yossi, not Rav Meir, because according to Rav Meir, even food that is chometz, that is fit for human consumption, can be burnt together with Tmei on Pesach. Must be that it's going according to Rav Yossi. And why can they be burnt together? Must be because we are equating the Gemara's, therefore saying, chometz that is not fit for consumption, to chometz that is also minat Torah. If it's not fit for consumption, so therefore there's no mitzvah of shimur on it. I don't have a mitzvah of shimur on it, and I can burn it with the tmeya. Similarly, the Gemara's rayas, the way Tosfos learns, is that if it's also midaraisa, if it's from the 7th hour and on, Rav Yossi would be maida, because similarly it's considered not fit. The Torah answered it, so it can be burnt together. But if it would be only on the 6th hour, where it's a Isser D'Rabbanan, not the Raisa, it would not equate it. We would not equate it to Nifsel Melachal for a person melech adam. So doesn't this show you that even though Rav Yossi says it cannot be burnt together on the 6th hour, but on the 7th hour, where there is an Isser D'Oraisa, it could be burnt together? The Gemara says, no, it's not a proof. Shiny Hasam, Dam for Baalmahu. You can't bring a raya, you can't bring a proof, because that's different. In the case of the Pal She'ifsha, it's Nifsa Melech Adam, it's considered dirt. So it loses its identity. So the way Rav Elchanan explains it is as follows. Initially, we thought that the reason that you can burn it together, the Tamei with the Tahira, is because since it's not going to be eaten, so therefore, since there's no mitzvah to eat this truma anymore, therefore I don't have a chiyuv to safeguard it from tumah. There's no chiyuv of shimur once it's not going to be eaten, and therefore the mitzvah of shimur falls off. Similarly, the Gemara thought to bring a raya that chametz on the 7th hour, it's also midaraisa, and therefore it's not going to be eaten, and it's also to eat it. Similarly, there's no chiyuv of shimur. I don't have to safeguard it from tum, and I therefore can burn together the tay and the tire. That's what we thought in the Havamina, that we were equating the two, and equating the pas that's not going to be eaten because it's ifsha, that it's moldy, to a case where it's aser. Now the Gemara says, no, maybe not. Shiny on from Baalma. Really, I'll tell you, why is it that you don't have to safeguard it, the pas ifsha, and you can burn the tmeya with the tahira? It's not because it's not going to be eaten, it's because it loses identity. It's not considered truma anymore. It loses identity as truma. So therefore, I can burn it together, the Tmei and the Torah. But something which did lose its identity, if you have regular Truma, maybe because of this, just because it's also, but it may be also, but it hasn't lost its identity, I still would have a chiyuv to safeguard it from Tuma. And I would still have a chiyuv of Shimur. And perhaps I would not be able to burn the Tmei and the Torah even on the 7th hour. So therefore, I have no raya that to Rav Yechan's approach to the machlokes between Rav Yossi and Rav Meir.